Welcome to both of you. Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Garrick, let me start with you first of all. You were a young man back then when the wall went up. In fact, you went to Germany 1 year after the wall was constructed in 1961, and then you stayed as the Berlin correspondent. Give us your insight, give us some anecdotes of how you think that a reunified Germany has changed the destiny of Europe.
Well, it's changed in so many ways. First of all, it was a historic event 20 years ago with the fall of the wall. It was, we discovered very quickly that it was easier to reunite a country legally, constitutionally, with a common flag than to reunite it psychologically. But I think as we look back on it, the significance is not just what happened, the fall of the wall, but why it happened and when it happened. It happened because Mikhail Gorbachev, the head of the Soviet Union, wasn't going to prevent it from happening. He wasn't going to support the communist leaders in Eastern Europe. But also the timing of when it happened. When you look back at that 1989, we were really in the early days of the digital age, and the Cold War power was industrial power, military power. We were moving to technological power, determining the balance. And now just one little anecdote. I was in New York the day it fell. Tom Brokaw, the anchor of Nightly News, was in Berlin. He was at that news conference when the East Germans announced the wall was opening, picked up something called a cell phone, and called the NBC office.
Right.
And we went on the air ahead of anybody else breaking the news that the wall was opening up. And that, to me, in my memory, is the technological importance and symbolic importance. We got the news first through digital technology. The Russians, the East Germans were way behind.
Right. Rodney, you also spent a significant amount of time in Europe. You were there for 8 years as the European economic correspondent for Newsweek. Share some anecdotes with us of your time there and also your thoughts of how you thought the coverage had gone, you know, these 20 years on after the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Well, I arrived in 2000, and I think that the key takeaway by that time was that Germany had been sort of reintegrated as the center, the economic center of Europe, which is its traditional role. And it provided really, by that time and certainly now, a really healthy model of globalization, both for Europe and for the rest of the world. Germany was able to keep a strong manufacturing sector, unlike Britain or the US or many other rich countries, in part because it was able to tap the resources of the East and of later Eastern European accession countries. And it's been a very virtuous circle. So German wages have stayed high. There's a strong German factory sector still, which is one of the reasons that they've actually come out of the global crisis this year faster than others, and there's been prosperity growing in the East as well.
So give us some more detailed knowledge in terms of the economics and the politics and some cultural perspective on how you think life has changed for Eastern Europeans.
Well, just two observations. In terms of the integration of Germany into the rest of the world, if you're on the Autobahn now, you'll be going a lot slower than you were 20 years ago because there's a lot more traffic and you'll be seeing cars from about 20 different countries. In terms of what life looks like, I think what you have now in Germany and really in much of the rest of Europe as a consequence of reunification is a middle class that looks more like an American middle class. Being middle class in Europe didn't look like being middle class here for some time. Now there's a level of prosperity. People travel a lot more. They can, you know, eat wild salmon now and again. It's sort of it's a more American style middle class than it was before, I would say.
Is that something that you agree with, Garrick? I mean, are those your
yes, the standard of living
also?
is not just a question of the middle class, the standard of living which has been going up, but also the globalization influences, the integration of cultural tastes and habits. So you don't feel that you're in a foreign place as much as you might have in the past. But I think as we look back on these days and 20 years ago, remember for many years we didn't know what to call the new era. We kept calling it the post-Cold War era for another 10 or 15 years, and then people stopped using that. We don't have a new name for today. Maybe it's globalization. But it's really looking back at the fact that, again, the greatest gift Europeans have given the world in the last half of the 20th century was the gift of peace. The other day we had Merkel and Sarkozy in Paris commemorating the end of World War I with the eternal flame. World War II followed, then the Cold War with tensions, possibility of nuclear war, and that does not exist at all. And what a different, wonderful place that part of the world is today.
Well, what did you make of the mainstream reporting of this story? Was there anything from the coverage that was missing? I mean, I know it's sort of like, you know, 20 years on, we have a habit of sometimes kind of like looking very sort of misty-eyed at the past. But was there anything that sort of jumped out at you in terms of how we reported this story?
Yeah, I would go back to the economic story again, which I think has really been underplayed. Germany is leading the world really out of recession. It was the first country to come out of recession. And I think that that's in large part due to this balance it's been able to strike with keeping a strong manufacturing sector, with going up the value chain. It's proven that you can have these kinds of jobs and still be a rich country. You don't have to sort of outsource everything to China. And I think that's a really important point.
But that said, what we share in common between the United States and Europe today is how do you deal with China, with India, with the competition that is out there. We're in the same boat in that, and we haven't really figured out an answer to that. President Obama is visiting Asia, Japan and China, and the Europeans are very concerned. And the Germans are very concerned too, and right they should be, and right we should be. We still have a big puzzle to figure out.
All right, Garrick Runner, thank you very much for joining us.